So thanks so much for coming today. This is a topic that is very close to home for a lot of people here in British Columbia. We're going to be talking about some proposed regulations that have come out by Health Canada, and that is to include the class of smaller and medium-sized growers. And we know that we have a very robust and mature under-regulated market here in British Columbia. And we've been looking for ways to try and transition those growers into the regulated framework. As we know, the ACMPR, as it stands right now, has been a seed-to-sale framework where in order to become licensed, you had to be able to specialize all the way through. So starting from your seedlings, the nursery class, all the way through to distribution and sale is done under one license. Now, if we look at any other industry that exists in the world today, it's usually broken up by different categories. If you want to be vertically integrated and go from seed to sale, you can, but you do so by applying for a variety of licenses. So up till now, that did not exist for the cannabis industry in Canada, but going forward now, with this new adult market, this is what's happening. So this proposed approach to the regulation of cannabis for these new micro categories is the deadline for submissions. If you want to make any commentary on it, you have till January 20th. So that's this coming Friday. So make sure you get your submissions in. The proposed act now breaks down this framework. So it's intended to allow for a range of different cannabis cultivators. So cultivation, processing, and research. It enables a diverse and competitive legal industry comprised of large and small operators throughout Canada. It reduces, the goal is to reduce the risk of infiltration into the industry by organized crime, and it provides products which meet high quality standards. So we definitely are very pleased with this because it's definitely a more inclusive and sustainable approach to policy regulation and licensing. So what we're going to do is talk about those categories, and it really resonates, like I said, with our growers here in British Columbia. And the categories, the new categories that have been introduced are nursery, that we're going to talk about today, is nursery production, micro cultivation, micro processing, and within all that is outdoor growing, which is something that's very exciting. I think that's going to be coming out into the framework. So what we're going to do is tap into the knowledge base of these four experts in growing. They have a great understanding of these categories of the micro and organic, which is really important as well in this framework of cultivation, and what that means in the context of legalization here in Canada. So we want to talk about how this very mature British Columbia market, and this market at one point was supplying 82% of all of Canada's cannabis product. So it is the backbone of Canada's cannabis economy. It exists here in Canada, and we're very proud of it here. So we're looking to effectively transition those growers into the new cannabis economy. So I'm going to start by introducing our panelists. We're really excited to have them here today. We're going to start with David here to my left. David Bernard-Perron. He's the Vice President of Horticulture at the Green Organic Dutchman. He's an agrologist, which is a branch of soil science dealing with the production of crops. He has a Master's of Science in Plant Sciences from McGill. And he began working in greenhouse production in 2001 and worked for McGill in the Greenhouse and Horticultural Research Center for 5 years. So thanks very much, David. And his experience is specific knowledge and provide a perspective on the realities of being a small-scale grower, trying to grow organically within the hyper-regulated ACMPR. Next to David, we have Travis. Travis Lane, I'm going to pull you up, comes to us from Victoria. He is a very long-time cannabis cultivator. He's the co-founder and a cultivation specialist for Levity Solutions, a consultation company specializing in organic cultivation, hydrocarbon extraction, and dispensary operations. In fact, the first internet dispensary licensed by a municipality in Victoria, so congratulations on that. He's also the founding director of the BC Independent Cannabis Association, a group which advocates for the inclusion of smaller-sized craft growers. And also a partner in Holistack, a Canadian company specializing in hydrocarbon extraction. So thanks for coming, Travis. Next to Travis, we have Kelly. Kelly, it's great to meet you today. I'm really excited to have you here. She's a partner at Dragonfly Earth Medicine, a family-owned business and farm, having started growing food and medicinal plants back in 1994 in Oregon. She eventually moved to BC and started Dragonfly Farms, which brings her long-standing dream to fruition of having an organic farm in cannabis cultivation. Is that right?
That's correct.
And she runs her farm. This is really interesting, actually, and we're going to talk about this. She runs her farm based on values, teachings, and beliefs from permaculture, eco-building, natural farming, herbology for plants, mycology, soil building, seed saving, microbiology, homeschooling, self-sustainability, regeneration, and closed-loop systems. So thanks, Kelly, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. And Sarah. Sarah comes to us from the Cowichan Valley. Thanks for coming out. She's born into a family of cannabis enthusiasts. She's an apprenticed herbalist and gardener. She's the director of the Craft Cannabis Association of British Columbia, and what her group has been doing is really trying to put the face of craft cannabis to the policymakers so that people understand that our robust underground market isn't infiltrated by organized crime and that they really are middle-class Canadians who do this for passion, do it either... Yeah, exactly. Round of applause for that. They do it because they find that the plant is therapeutic and just love working with it. So she's also been involved with the Vancouver Island Compassion Society. So a big round of applause, please, for our panelists, and then we're going to start into questions. And then just so you know, we'll leave about 15 minutes of questions to the very end. So please think about what you want to ask these people, again, focused on our fantastic BC industry. So I'm going to start with, my notes are all over. David, I've got a question for you. Let's start with the organic growing. All right. My glasses here. Okay, David, your experience and industry-specific knowledge is to provide the small-scale grower perspective, and you first started in cannabis with Whistler Medicinal. You designed their certified organic program there, making them the only fully certified, was it LP producer in Canada?
Yep.
Excellent. And then as at recently, mid-September, you moved over to the Green Organic Dutchman. So what I'd like to ask you is, what does organic mean in the context of the ACMPR and the medical regulations, and then moving forward as we go into the social adult use market?
So the organic certification means we have an independent third party that came and assessed our growing system, and making sure that everything we use is sourced mostly sustainably, it's pesticide free, and it's been approved for use in organic agriculture. So we have an independent party that does that for us, and that's on top of the regulation of the ACMPR or licensing and all of that.
And do you think these certifications are going to change within the industry as we move forward, or can you see certification programs happening? Because right now anyone can say they're organic. So how do we move this forward as we move into this new reality?
Yeah, this is where the certified organic is important part. So it says that you've been assessed by someone else, and the certifying body are writing internal certification for cannabis. Some of them we Fraser Valley Organic Producer Association is a certifying body for Whistler. We had EcoCert that's been certifying other licensed producer also in the country. So they are writing their own internal certification based on Canadian standard for organic agriculture. And those internal certification is what's going to become the norm for cannabis production, organic cannabis production in the industry.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I'm going to ask you, Travis. You talk about doing a no-till method of growing. Can you explain a little bit about that first?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of a no-till style garden is that you're going to create your soil, and your soil is going to be a vector for everything your plant needs. So you start by making sure there's micro-life in there, making sure you've got things like worms. I mean, no-till's an interesting moniker. You do have to change your soil a little bit over time, but once I put my soil into my beds, it can last me years and years and years without any need for any kind of nutrient supplement other than adding a little bit more soil, some good humic matter. I do everything water only. There's no bottled nutrients or anything required in my system. The inputs are lower and the products of a higher caliber. I believe that we're going to see this become more prevalent going forward on the larger scale, mostly because the inputs are so much smaller, and it makes sense once you go outdoor. I'm fascinated to see what happens with field planting once we actually get outside.
That's actually what I wanted to ask you about next, because you're involved in outdoor greenhouses, and one of the new categories, I get asked this all the time too, is really outdoor growing in BC. We do know that, especially up Vancouver Island, there are large swaths of plants that are being grown. So maybe we can explain to the audience, what is it about the BC climate and the various areas of BC climate which are really good for outdoor growing, and how many crops can they do a year when they're outdoor growing?
Yeah, I mean, within the greenhouse, you're using technology to protect yourself from the elements. So it's a hybrid between indoor and outdoor growing. Most of the greenhouses that have success producing very high quality smokable flower are climate controlled and sealed. Just because, we don't live in an equatorial area. We live in something closer to sort of Britain or Holland's climate. But then look at Holland, where they use greenhouses to produce mass quantities of flowers and food, and they have an entire agricultural industry based on that. So I think in British Columbia, we can look to that and see how they've sort of set up everything there, despite their climate, to be one of the biggest farming countries in the world. Once we go outside, it's going to be difficult to do, no large outdoor field crop is doing multiple crops per year just because of the photoperiod sensitivity, right? And so we're talking about, at the beginning, we're going to be moving varietals that have been developed for indoor cultivation outside. We're going to be dealing with a whole new range of problems. I think we're going to find that most outdoor crops are going to start as being oil-producing crops. But that will change over time, and a lot of it will depend on exactly where you are. There are places like the Sunshine Coast and the Cowichan Valley and stuff like that get more sun, that don't have the colder temperatures and stuff like that as early. But I think outdoor cultivation in BC is going to be a challenge.
Well, that's one of the things. So people will always argue that outdoor growing doesn't make a great plant because it's not that high THC content. What can you talk about that as we move forward? Because we are seeing now the shift from indoor to outdoor. More of the LPs now, even if they have indoor space, they are now building, their expansion is in greenhouse. So maybe talk a bit about the robustness of a plant and how even this nursery category will help come into this.
Well, one of the things about the sunshine is that the sunshine provides such a broad spectrum that we can't replicate that indoors. If you take your typical 1,000-watt bulb and you go hang it outside on the darkest day of the year at noon, and you stand 3 feet away, you can't tell the light's on. The other thing about it is the UV rays that come from the sun. If those hit the plant, one of the things trichomes are for the plant is sort of a self-grown sunscreen. It's a protection against those harmful rays from the sun. Anyone that says outdoor cannabis produces lower THC numbers just needs to go down to California to see that's a total fallacy. The fact of the matter is it'll produce higher levels of THC, in my opinion.
Fantastic, great. And this is our opportunity to educate everybody, because really people don't know, and I get these questions all the time as well. So thank you for that. Kelly, so you're kind of the other side of what David does. David has been in the ACMPR and the licensed producer, and you are in the underregulated market, and you do outdoor growing. So tell us a bit about your experience in that. And I noticed you talk about doing regenerative farming in closed loop systems. Can you explain a bit about that?
Well, first of all, I've been working as a consultant in really large indoor grow facilities, as well as outdoor growth facilities, as well as light depth grow facilities down in the States, Europe, and in Canada. So on our own farm, we particularly do light dep. I believe that the best outdoor cannabis cultivars should be finished. If you want to be utilizing cultivars that aren't for cold climate, you should be finishing them by September 1st. So, utilizing light dep is a wonderful way to bring up your cannabinoid levels, bring up your terpene levels because of all the different rays of the sun, as well as growing in soil. So if you all are doing any kind of greenhouse production, light depping to be able to finish by September 1, because it's the fall that's our problem. The sun starts going down, our nighttime temperatures start going down, and there becomes a major fluctuation between our nighttime temperatures and our daytime temperatures. And then that's when you have your cyanobacteria on the outside of your leaf structure, which actually protects your leaves, which starts to be broken down. So it creates an opening for different types of molds and fungi. So I really, encourage you all, if you want to grow the highest quality flower in Canada, have the particular cultivar to go full season outdoor, or go light dep and be finished by September 1st. And that's how we run it on our farm. The second part of your question was, what is it to be a regenerative farmer? Regenerative farming is moving beyond sustainability. It means that on our farm, we produce a tremendous amount of food and also medicine without any inputs at all. So what I'm saying is that with all of these small LPs that are starting to come into the market today, your number one concern is not how fast you can get into the market and how much money you can make in the first year. What you all are going for is, can you be in business in 5 years from now? The big guys are arriving. They're not all here right now. They're going to undercut us. So our main focus as small LP craft cannabis growers is to cut our costs. And the way to cut our costs is to be able to utilize your soil as your number one entity. And you're not feeding your plant. You're feeding your soil. Your soil is a living organism. Your plant is only secondary to the uptake. So when you're utilizing synthetics, your plant only has the ability to uptake in one way. When you're utilizing organics, your plant has the ability to uptake in 3 different ways. It's communicating with the microbiology in the soil, which is incredibly important for high quality craft cannabis boutique markets. So having really good strains, cutting your costs with having a fantastic soil, and also utilizing nutrients that you can grow on your own farm, creating biomass. We utilize nettles, we utilize comfrey, we utilize alfalfa, we utilize couch grass, thistle. I could go on and on. All of these are wonderful, incredible, uptakeable nutrients to the cannabis plant because they're being broken down immediately by the microbiology in your soil. So it's like this beautiful communication that plants have with plants. If you put like a whole calcium carbonate rock inside of your soil, how long is it going to take for that plant to be able to uptake it and the microbiology to break it down? But if you actually take calcium and you add it to a comfrey patch, then you've got comfrey that's super, super enriched with calcium. Then you can then give it to your plants, which is 100% uptakeable without any nutrient runoff. I think that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you find that these are they going to be easy for people to implement these? I mean, you also have this peer certification program, which would help people get to these sort of methods. Are they hard to implement, easy to implement? It's something you were saying it's especially good for craft growers. And of course, financial considerations are always at the utmost of your mind. So is this something that's difficult or easy for the craft growers to implement?
Absolutely. Learning about regenerative farming is imperative for the future of cannabis. I believe that the best grown flowers are grown in soil. I believe that the best grown flowers are grown with intentional energy. The reason why all of you are sitting in this room and even having this conversation with us is because you ingest cannabis. Because cannabis has given you a higher intelligence and an education to make you question more. If we take the lead of the actual cannabis plant to educate us further, then we're already way ahead of the game. All of my education and everything that I have here is 27 years of paying attention to the cannabis plant. And she has taught me a tremendous amount of health, well-being, happiness, healthy soil. And if we can only give one thing to our future generations, healthy soil is it. Your money doesn't mean anything, but healthy soil is what we can give to the future. You had asked about, we have a pure certification, and we just had decided at Dragonfly Earth Medicine that the way that we grow cannabis is not recognizable by organic certifications or third-party certifications. I don't feel like that represents my farm or a lot of other farms out there at all. So we came up with a certification that involves regenerative farming. It involves closed loops. It involves, if you're growing a cannabis plant, what does the cannabis plant want the most? It wants itself. That's how it grows in nature. So if you're reutilizing your cannabis plant, you've given it all these thousands of dollars of nutrients. Why not put that cannabis plant back into your soil or into your tea brews? That's one closed loop. Another closed loop is to use the sun. That's a closed loop. Reutilizing your soil. You had talked about no-till. That's another closed loop. So our pure certification is really based off of closed loop, regenerative cannabis ideologies facilities. We now have over 80 farms in the U.S. that are on board with this pure certification. It's making growers stand out. And when people and consumers go into the dispensaries, they see that pure certification and they say, yes, I do not have to question that because I know that that was grown with intention and with regenerative cannabis ideology and practices.
That's excellent. That's a great answer. Thank you. Thanks, Kelly. And Sarah, so we've been working kind of in the same realm as far as the advocacy goes, because we've been, my industry association, I'm with CTAC, the Executive Director of the Cannabis Trade Alliance of Canada, and we've been advocating for the inclusion of the small craft growers as well, and we argued for the class of nursery and some sort of a footprint, and the government came out with micro. We also argued for processors. So since you're right in it, Sarah, and you come from this legacy of craft growers, cannabis growers, I'd like to for you to discuss the current state. Your hands are right in. You talk to these growers. You're dealing with these growers. When you speak with them and you speak with your membership, what is craft to everybody? We use this word craft a lot in these conversations. What does that really mean? And how do the growers that you represent see that in the new framework going forward?
Well, I think looking at these large industrial style, pharmaceutical style cannabis facilities that have popped up over the last few years, it's become very apparent that to craft producers that we are small farms and that we are independent. I think that's a really important aspect. I think, we do what we do for the love of the plant, and also for the autonomy that it's allowed us for the last few years. But it also encompasses a lot of qualities, and I think I really liked the way you described your farm, Kelly, and I think that's how we think about craft cannabis here in BC too. So it is artisanal, it's sustainable, it is boutique style, local, unique, strains that have been developed in particular regions over decades. It is community building, and it is organic perhaps, and it has been a place for innovation.
That's what I actually want to talk about, is that innovation, that community that you mentioned, the culture. Because there really is quite a defined culture when it comes to cannabis, and especially here in BC. And I really want to emphasize this because sometimes I think we take it for granted here in British Columbia, because we really, really are in the hotbed when it comes to cannabis production. And what I've been finding, especially as I go across Canada, BC is that hot spot, and as we move eastward, it really starts getting colder, and especially with the knowledge and experience that's out there, and that culture, which is really inherent in British Columbia. So anyone can answer this too, is how do we maintain that culture? Can it be maintained, or is it just going to become commoditized like any other plant or commodity that's out there?
Well, I think we can look at some of these other industries when we start talking about what the culture is and what the craft definition is too, because look, if I want to go buy a craft beer, I can walk into the brewery, meet the brewer, meet the owner of that business, and talk to him about his product or her product. If I have a problem with the product, I actually can go and address the owner of the business. Whereas if I go and buy a Coca-Cola and I have a problem with a Coca-Cola, I don't even know who owns Coca-Cola. Nobody does. There's millions of people that own it. So I think there is a difference. I think craft represents this ability to communicate with your local environment and your local purchasers. And that's what creates this culture, is we end up with people that do this, that love what they do, that run a small owner-operated business. They end up communicating with the people that consume their products on a very personal level, and we have this culture develop over time. There's cultures around culture around lots of things. There's a craft beer culture, there's wine culture, there's all of these things that we can look at and pull from. The VQA winery versus the winery across the world. Absolutely, I hope one day I can go buy Colombian Gold from Colombia at a local dispensary. But I also hope that it's possible for me to go and meet the local grower of this product and find out what he's doing and see his facility.
So that ties into cannabis tourism as well then. Like I could see that you would go to the vineyard, like you mentioned, you can go for wine, your cheese on the deck. Can you see that happening? Would you like to see that obviously happening in cannabis as well? Sarah, maybe you can touch on that.
I think that's when you asked what people are discussing these days as we move towards legalization. I think people are really excited in the craft community about what the possibilities may be. A little worried that we may be very restricted, again, looking at the regulations as they have been set up. But if we're looking at a small farm, which is what we're hoping the micro-cultivation licenses and the processing licenses are going to be, we're talking about having the ability to have farm gate sales, like any other food product, agricultural product. And we really need that as a small farm. We need the ability to connect with our consumer. If we're asking for reduced regulations, which we will be as a small farm, we're hoping that it's going to be affordable and it's going to be manageable for expert growers to produce this product. Then you produce things like eggs. Sometimes we want to talk a little bit more about food sometimes than we do with beer or wine because it is a food crop. It's an agricultural product. And so you can go to a farmer and buy eggs that aren't necessarily handled in the traditional system by there being a special sticker on the Ziploc bag, perhaps, that has the name and the contact information of the farm. And by going to that farm and seeing how this farm operates and meeting the farmer themselves, that you as a consumer are taking some responsibility by purchasing that product. But that's a beautiful thing. And actually, the future consumers are moving in this direction. They are becoming ethical consumers.
I would agree with that. And leading into that, and then we can go into it, is on that because we talked about VQA, and when we talk about the cannabis tourism, looking at some kind of VQA certification now, we can start looking at ag grants because if we're looking at farming outdoor, it can be on ALR land, which attracts granting from government, which can attract the certification for terroir, for example. So you can now say this was proudly grown under the sun of the Okanagan Valley. So that I think is really important too in defining craft in the small scale as well. Kelly, do you have something?
Yeah, I wanted to give everybody a really sobering statistic here. 680,000 pounds of marijuana has been grown in the state of Oregon. Only 232,000 pounds will be sold. That's very important. All of these people here in this room are going for LPs. We're talking about Canada not possibly having enough cannabis for for people in Canada. I believe that to be completely untrue. So the people that are selling their cannabis in Oregon and in California are the craft cannabis. They are talking about their terroir. They're talking about their Appalachia. They're talking about what separates them from the other really large-scale growers. It's incredibly important that boutique also means that you have your own strains or things that are specific to your farm. Also gathering with other farms that have like-minded feelings and techniques and practices that you all have is going to become imperative in this really big market, because I want to remind you that the big boys, they might be some that have already arrived, but a lot of them have not arrived yet. They are going to be undercutting per gram. They are going to be coming in, and that's why I had said earlier that just stay in business for the next 5 years. It's not come out, put all of your money that you've got into it. Let's start scaling back, and really now we're not just farmers, we're marketers. We're now, trying to reach out as community members. This is what's going to help the craft cannabis market shine in the future.
And that's important, is reaching out to the community. And I find the growers that have been successful is they do engage with their politicians, they engage with their neighbors. And just like we're up here today, it's all about educating. That's what I find more than anything. Every time we talk, it's just educating the public and getting people to feel really comfortable that as we move forward, it is just done by normal Canadians, everyday Canadians. And we do want to normalize this. I understand that the government is a little afraid of that phrase, but that is where we're going to go. And it should just be like anything else, where you can just go to your store and pick up your cannabis, whether it's in extracted form, whether it's in bud form. And again, being able to say, well, I want to buy that brand because I know that brand gives me a really nice, consistent product from this area of British Columbia, and I know that grower, I feel like I know that grower. And I think that's really important to have that connection. I just want to shift quickly before we get to questions. One last question is the issue of testing and pesticides. Do we see that being an issue as we move forward, especially on the outdoor cultivation, organic cultivation? Do you see anything happening, Travis? Maybe you can speak to that, and David as well.
Yeah, I mean, David's been through the ACMPR QA, so he knows better than I what they faced under that system. It's my opinion that the microbial screening is geared more towards lab conditions, and we've lost sort of the, I guess you would say, the horticultural heritage of this plant-based product. And so, I mean, things like just random screens for aerobic bacteria are unnecessary. There's no public safety reason to do that. We should be screening for Salmonella, E. coli, Aspergillus, these kind of things. But we need to put it in a place where it matches up with a public safety issue. And so for me, I mean, I've been heavily advocating for them to loosen those regulations a little bit because I would like to see them encourage people to use more, she uses the term regenerative, or organic, or that kind of thing, because when it comes down to it, there's the environmental impact factor, there's the price of inputs. All of these things should be leading people towards a more sustainable production method. And right now, that's not where we're at. Like the legal industry right now is very restrictive, almost all indoor, and there's issues with people bringing product to market without having to irradiate it or something first because they violate some of these microbial screenings.
David, can you touch on that as well?
Yeah, like we were talking about that yesterday, actually, and it's true. Like we should test for pesticide, heavy metals, and all those contaminants that Travis mentioned. But also, going with the outdoor growing and all that, it's going to be hard if you want to pass this microbial screening because dust is blowing on that, and then if those tests are too hard, just because there's total microbial count, even if they're non-pathogenic. That's good. It's hard to not have to irradiate that product if you want to bring it to market. But you were mentioning those tests are for medical purposes as well. This is with legalization. Hopefully that's going to change. But this is a medicine that's destined for some people that have completely absent the immune system as well. So that's what was behind making those tests. It's true that they're really tough to match, and that's why we've seen a lot of people irradiating product. So hopefully when the class of product it's going to be recreational and not pharmaceutical, maybe that's going to loosen that a little bit.
And I think we can definitely say that Health Canada, from what I've seen, is receptive to these ideas. They know that the medical system was extremely strict. It was put in place by a previous government. I think that with these adult use regulations coming in, we are going to see a loosening of some things. But Health Canada also aren't farmers. They need people to speak up and tell them and be like, hey, let's change this for these reasons and make a logical evidence-based case for it as well. Right?
I think that's really important because if you are a cultivator or a processor, that's why I mentioned at the outset, please put in your submissions to Health Canada by the 20th and don't stop. I mean, you don't have to be part of an industry association to lobby, to talk to your local representatives, whether it's municipal, provincially through your MLA, federally through your MP. Get to know them and talk to them about this because like I said, they don't understand this plant. They don't even know what home growing means. A lot of them have never even seen one in real life. So again, coming to them and just starting to break down those barriers of fear and stigma, because that's what we're fighting against. That's really what it comes down to.
And education as well. I feel like especially, with this microbial stuff down in the States, they've been doing microbial counts in all of the recreational states. And absolutely, people are growing outdoor and absolutely people are growing organically and they are passing microbials. It's not like some impossible feat. There's just so much misinformation out there that whenever you all do get a really good educational piece, pass it on. We're no longer in the black market. We have this beautiful ability to share information with each other so that we can all bring each other up.
That's super important. Thank you, Kelly. Yep.
And as a last note, this is an opportunity. The cannabis plant is, we all know, one of the most amazing plants. small farms are the way to benefit the earth, and cannabis is a conduit for us to become more aware about ways to do that and get back to feeding the earth instead of just taking.
Wonderful. That's so true. All right. We've got time for questions now, and I think there's a lot of passion up here, and I'm sure there's a lot of passion in the audience because, again, this is an issue that holds very true to British Columbia. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. I can see out. Yep, right in the front there.
I just want to know what your guys' recommendations would be. What kind of rules do you want to see for this micro producers that'll help us little guys compete?
Well, we talked a little bit, talked a little bit about outdoor production for one thing, being a new and beautiful option as far as reduced costs. It has been done. People have been guerrilla gardening in BC forever. So we know that it's possible, and it's just a matter of taking all of our collective experience and building this future sustainable, beautiful, consumer-focused product. But I think also the government, they're looking for answers. What sort of regulations should they be choosing? And so I've been looking at things like the fruits and vegetables regulations, as an example, or the natural health products regulations. These, to me, make a lot more sense than some sort of pharmaceutical set of regulations. I don't know how much they're going to hear us on this, but I think that, again, as a small farmer, it seems that they're willing to be a little more open-minded and understand that that amount of product going into your local community is not, it's a drop in the hat compared to the thousands and thousands of kilograms that are coming out of these huge industrial agricultural facilities. So,
and I think, I'm sorry. I think I can answer your question just really to the point. I had given you all that sobering statistic, and really the way that the little guys are going to be able to keep up is lower your cost and grow fire. Really, you better be growing the fire because that's the most important thing. You have to have good strains, and you have to be above and beyond all of these really large organizations that are going to come in and try to undercut us. So grow the fire, share your genetics with the people around you, and hopefully that is going to be allowed, with the new regulations.
One of the things that faces small producers is these barriers to entry that exist under the current ACMPR. In order to become a full medical producer, you have to have RPICs, APICs, QAP people. You've got to have a security system in place. You've got to have all these things. They essentially prevent owner operation. So if I have a 1,000 square foot garden and I want to be able to bring that product to market, that's a one-person job. So we've got to find a way to communally do some of these burdens, share the burdens among many producers. This seems to be part of the reason for the proposal of the processor category of license, that they're going to put some of the QA on the processor, they're going to force the packaging, the labeling, all that on the processor, and the processor can buy from many, many micros. Because like we said at the start, under the ACMPR, you have to be in everything. You're the vendor, you're the packager, you're the compliance people, you're the producer. If I just want to be a small farmer, I shouldn't have to worry about that. I should be able to produce my product and sell it to the people that are going to take care of that. I'm hoping that the new Health Canada system allows that to happen because owner operation is the key to keeping small farms around.
But also, talking about that is that it's going to be really important that the people who are representing your crop are representing it in the way that you want it to be represented. So, talking about the Appalachia and the area that you're from is going to be totally imperative. So I'm a little bit concerned about small growers then giving up all of their everything to somebody else to say, here, market it for me. Are they going to really represent you in the way that you want to be represented?
But if you want to
take on a very important conversation.
If you want to take on that burden, it's clear that you can go and apply for a processing license as well and do both. So by separating them, you're creating a flexibility in the system that lowers those barriers communally. And so that's the hope. Anyway, who knows if it'll work properly as intended, but I'm hoping that that'll be how it goes.
And I think that's the thing too, is we have to look at the fact that the regulations are coming out as they are, but don't think that this is what we're going to be stuck with forever. They are going to continually evolve. They're going to be a little strict. Again, Health Canada is really learning this as they go as well. And so then things should open up a little bit more. But I truly believe with my heart that having these licensing classes is the way to get our smaller craft growers. And because the ACMPR, the way it was set up, it's just financially untenable for smaller growers to meet.
And there are lots of craft processors who are coming forward who have come from this culture as well, and their expertise is in processing, and they want to support, they want to represent the craft microcultivators, they want to help. We work as a team in that regard.
And for processing, just so you know, so those are the people that are creating the oils and that other value add product. And just so you know that not every processor necessarily wants to be the cultivator, and cultivators don't necessarily want to be processors. So processors have to have the availability to be able to source the excellent crops that they need to make that value added oil in the very end. You know a bit about that, Travis, because you do extractions.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things, obviously they're delaying extraction, legalization for another year afterwards. They're probably going to hand out some R&D licenses and get that going. Part of it is about creating this flexibility of multiple licenses so that if you want to have one of everything and do everything and build a team, you can do that. But if you just want to do one thing that you're very good at standalone, and in the case of something like processors that are extracting, they're probably going to move on and sell a lot of that source material to other processors that might be making edibles or making vape cartridges or something like that. And by allowing everybody to have a smaller, lower burden license that overall meets the QA necessities for public safety, then we can share that burden. And that's what's going to allow small players to survive. Once the market develops under legalization, obviously pricing and overhead and inputs and all that kind of stuff is going to become an issue. But I mean, right now we're talking about just getting a license that allows us to do what we do.
Get into the marketplace, and then you're going to have to compete. But at least allow an opportunity for them and a framework for those growers to get in. Okay, is there any other questions? Yeah, right there in the third row. Third row on my left.
Given the new circumstances in July and some of the industrial producers of marijuana and cannabis, would not a rightful platform for you guys to be playing on be, we don't need to be at a race to the bottom. There's going to be a floor price of $10 a gram. Surely with the passion and quality that you guys bring to the table, it's as much about shooting for a higher price point where I think consumers will be prepared to pay for that passion, knowledge and the organic processes that you guys are using.
Absolutely. I believe that using organic processes and being transparent to the public is going to equal a higher overall price point on the product. I think you see it already. Like organic flower in the black market sells for significantly more than something grown in a basement somewhere. The thing about the price point thing is that part of it's going to be marketing, part of it's going to be distribution. There's going to be a lot of factors that go into it, but I do think that you see it in beer, you see it in wine, you see it in restaurants, you see it in food farms. The small group of passionate people produce products that are of a higher caliber and a higher variance than large-scale production. I don't think anybody on this stage thinks that there's not going to be massive-scale industrial cannabis production. We just want a place for the small producer.
You have to separate yourself. It's going to be really important to separate yourself and whatever group is that you're working with to be producing the highest quality. I believe that organic produces the most fire strains and the most fire that I've ever been out there. I've not ever seen it any differently. I'm going to continue to believe that until I see something indoor that is of higher quality. That's just my personal belief.
And this is where the distribution model does become important to us, so that if you're looking at having to deal with a centralized distribution system as is proposed in almost every province in BC, you have to produce mass quantity to participate in that program. But if you have a small facility, like a small brewer, there are rules that allow you to distribute within a certain radius of where your farm is. So we're relying on that sort of program. We're also relying on the farm gate sales, so that we can fetch that price that we deserve.
Okay, any other questions? Yep, fourth row there with the hat.
Given that a lot of us kind of have a history of growing indoors with very wasteful systems that are, very energy intensive. Is there a future for those of us with that kind of knowledge in the micro producer arena?
Yes. I mean, early on, we're talking about, when you talk about the indoor growing and what's happened through cannabis cultivation, we've seen massive movement forward as a result in technologies for indoor gardening and techniques for indoor gardening, because it's the only cash crop that's produced indoors. And so early on, there's no doubt that the preponderance of the grows that are going to be approved for micro are going to be indoors. There's going to be lots of small indoor grows, people that have been doing this for a long, long time. It's really more of a question of the long-term future. As the market develops, it's cheaper to produce outdoors. It's cheaper to produce under the sun, even if you make a virtual indoor greenhouse that's completely climate controlled. So I think part of it will be, yes, there will be room, but there will also be innovation required on behalf of the small producers to know where the market's going and sort of follow that trend as well.
And lowering your costs. Trying to get into a system that you're not throwing away your soil, where you're utilizing your soil forever, where the inputs that you're utilizing are really at low cost, utilizing whole foods. We all know that buying processed foods for our body, number one, is not very good for us, and number two, it's extremely expensive. It's not any different for the cultivation of cannabis. We can definitely be utilizing whole foods, and that can be of low cost to us and of really good health to our soils.
And I think it's important to recognize the expertise that's going to be coming out of these grow rooms, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of those growers, once they're actually given the ability to go outside and to experiment with all of these practices, we're going to see phenomenal fire.
I think that's an important point, is that prohibition is the reason we've been hiding. The reason everyone grows indoor is because it's illegal and you'll get arrested if you just grow it out front. So part of that is we're going to see that change. As soon as legalization lifts that need to hide, we're going to see things that we're not expecting now, that we're not going to address now, because we're going to see true innovation. We're going to see an entire industry be able to do this openly. We're going to see technologies developed. We're going to see government grants for scientific research. All of these things that don't happen under prohibition. And so the end of prohibition is going to change the entire marketplace and the way all of us produce and the way all of us do business.
Excellent. That's so true, because everyone's had to hide. That's exactly it. I mean, how many cucumbers and tomatoes are grown in bunkers? I'm really not sure about that. Okay, we're supposed to be wrapping up, but if there's some more questions, I am going to push it. We've got one in the second row here. Yes.
Hi, how you doing? So we're talking about waiting for prohibition to end, but really we don't even know if legalization is really actually going to occur this summer. So meanwhile, in the meantime, we're going to still have to be feeding the market because access is needed to be done. And meantime, people are still going to be arrested. So if we foresee this happening, what do you see with our market so far that is supporting the whole industry, which is BC Craft? What do you see for our future, if we can't get in there at this time? And what else is going to happen when the legalization scheme comes in, that they don't allow us to be a part of it? What do you foresee happening with the craft industry as well then?
Well, I think that in the meantime, I can't totally answer your question because we're a little bit unsure of what's going to happen with the laws and regulation. But in the meantime, hit the books, people. It's time to start hitting the books, because really and truly what you all were doing before may not be flying anymore. Whatever pesticides that you were adding because it was an easy way out is not going to be flying anymore. So take this time to get better, become better growers. It's not all about not sharing. It's about, hey, this person is a great grower. I'm going to go to their scene and I'm going to go try to find out whatever I can find out. So in the interim period, educate yourselves so that when you are ready for the market, that literally you're ready for the market, both with marketing and both with your strains that you have and your cultivation, production, and technique practices.
And I think, we're moving forward, but, we have these roots, right? And so there's going to be people who are not going to participate in this legal program no matter what.
No matter what.
And that will continue to happen. You need to make a choice for yourself as a producer. Do you want to be a part of this future regulated world? And if you do, then you have to think about consequences that may prevent you from doing that. But I think also as a force, as the cultivators, the consumers as well, right? As all of this is changing and happening, more and more people are just becoming aware of what this plant really is, and that it shouldn't be prohibited. And so, it's hard to imagine 10 years ago what we were going through in the courts, if that sort of thing were to happen today, it seems very odd that that would happen. And, so we continue the fight. There's that aspect of it, but.
Also, I was just thinking a side note on that. Is any people in this area who have a medical license that are part of the injunction, it's really important to know that any future licenses that you get make that injunction null and void.
Keep your MMAR.
Well, I mean, one of the things, too, we need to consider, if anybody thinks that legalization means the end of the black market swiftly, they're very, very misinformed. This is going to be a slow, long process. It's not about converting the growers over to the white market. It's about converting the purchasers and end users of the product over to the white market. And so right now, as long as people are willing to buy black market product, if legalization doesn't go through, we've been living in an era of virtual non-enforcement in BC. I know there's other parts of the country that have a very different perspective on this. But, we have municipalities giving out business licenses to businesses that aren't supposed to be legally operating. The groundswell, like the punny grassroots kind of, this is a widespread cultural movement towards legalization. And it's come from the education of the consumer more than anything else. And so even if legalization doesn't happen in July, which I think it will. Like, I do believe the government will get this done. I don't know what it'll look like, but I do believe it'll get done. The market's still going to be there. Economics don't care that much about the regulations. Regulations are essentially restriction on the free flow of product and money. So if you want to continue operating illegally, and you already are, that's likely what most people that can't participate in the system will do, is they'll continue to do what they were already doing until their customers go to the white market. How long is that going to take? I mean, it's probably going to take a decade.
Don't
even
quit
if
your
they do
day
it
job.
Right. Yeah.
I've got a question that I'm going to throw. That was excellent, by the way, all of those answers. I've got a question that I'm just going to throw out top of your head. Canopy space for micro. What do you think? Square footage?
Yeah, so for me, I think square footage of canopy space is the best metric to start with for 3 reasons. One, it doesn't encourage diversion. So if you say, hey, you went over your revenue or you went over your yield, am I better off taking a penalty or diverting it to the black market? If you say it's plant count, it limits the methodology based on trying to maximize your yield. And it's really easy for inspectors to come in and measure a square. It's a lot easier than trying to figure out where that extra gram of trim went or something like that. I'd like to see something in the range of 20,000 square feet as the limit. Some people say that's really big, but when we're talking about people that are going to have 10 million square feet of canopy space, I think 20,000 square feet's a drop in the bucket. I think most of the small producers are probably under 5,000 square feet, but most of the product probably comes from grows between 10 and 20,000 square feet. And if the goal is to be able to bring these people into the market in order to increase supply and expertise, we want to try and get as many of them as we can. The hardest part is going to be sort of figuring out what the burdens are, I think. As long as we've got a decent metric and a decent, like an easy to use metric, it's more going to be about the quality assurance and security. And
David, what do you think? What do you think a threshold will be? You've seen the ACMPR side, and you know the craft side. What's a measure?
We don't really know what it's going to look like, but right now the license is like tied to your civic address. So as long as your land will allow you, you can be as big as you want. So they're going to have to define what a micro grower will be based on that. But I think what Travis was suggesting up to there will allow you to have an efficiently run farm where you can be innovative, you can cut labor costs also because you're allowed to scale to a certain size, and you can use your land base for stuff like Kelly's doing, using bioaccumulator plant and regenerative practices if you decide to go down that route. So if they make it too small as well, you need to be able to farm and survive with it also, and considering that we will see price contraction in the industry also in the future. So you have to be able to build like efficiency in your business and cut down your costs and be productive.
Kelly, outdoor, what do you see as a threshold? And you do indoor as well for micro. What should outdoor start with? An acre until you show you can do it and then expand from there?
Yeah, just given the way that the market has happened in the States, it seems like canopy size is definitely going to be the best. It's going to help keep small growers in the industry, which is incredibly important for diversity of the cannabis plant and also diversity of products. So I really like canopy, but a lot of us who have been part of the medical grow who had numbers really learned how to grow super big, huge, massive plants, and that was one plant. So that's been fun as well.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Sarah?
Yeah. So this is something we've been talking about for a while, but micro is the government's way of measuring and applying licenses. So at the Craft Cannabis Association of BC, we've been discussing the idea of having the micro category, which should be small because we want to bring in as many people as possible and keep the regulations as simple as possible. And we're thinking in the realm of if we have to go square foot, 5,000 square feet, under 1,000 kilograms, like well under 1,000 kilograms per year. That's another way to measure. And what we're saying is, similar to the craft beer industry, is that we will have a craft industry-defined size, so that craft will encompass up to, let's say, 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 square feet, and that will be relevant to the total market that exists. And we will define that as an industry and as consumers and people involved. And so for now, we can discuss micro, but craft is going to be a little bit bigger than that.
I think there's a really important point to whatever the government sets the demarcation line at, is that there needs to be an easy way for a micro to transfer their skills and their facility into a standard license. So when we look at how this is going to go long term, and we need talent in the cannabis industry, someone might start with a small personal grow or a small medical grow, and then they want to do this for a living, so they get a micro license. Then they find they're really good at it and they want to expand. The government has to allow that. There's going to be lots of people that'll be happy at 3,000 square feet, make a decent living doing it by themselves if they grow great product. But there's lots of people that'll be more ambitious than that, or will learn over time that this is what they want to do as a career and that they want to get bigger. So I hope the government takes that into account too. That way, if you set the micro license threshold a little bit lower and it's easy to convert into a standard license, then yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
I was also saying that, everybody in this room are cannabis enthusiasts. That means that we're disruptors of society. That means that we need to continually disrupt this industry to get it to the place that we want to. So the 20th, get in all of your stuff, continue to be a disruptor so that we get the laws and the regulations that we want in this industry.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we are really pushing it with time. I don't know if they're going to let us take one more question. Yeah. All right. Awesome. Okay, we'll take another question. I'm standing. We've got a few now. With the
6 more questions.
6 more questions. Sorry, he was up, and then we'll take you over there.
Who? Which one?
Hoodie?
Excuse me. Hi, Matthew. How are you guys doing today?
Good, thanks.
Sorry,
Matthew.
this is a question for the growers on stage. What are my alternatives rather than like the Avids or the Forbid, or for powder mildew, the Novas or the Meldothion? I don't want to use a pesticide. I don't want to use a pesticide. I want to use, an enzyme or neem oil, even though neem oil is illegal now. I want to go an alternate route, but how do I do that? Even if you keep your room below 50% humidity, you still end up with powder mildew at times.
Well, we have an integrated pest and fungal management program that it's free for anybody. All of our education that we put out there is totally free. We utilize predators and we utilize clean room, and cleanliness is really different than the allopathic hospital cleanliness. Cleanliness is more about beneficial microbiology. You have to learn how to become partners with your beneficial microbiology, both on your leaf structure and in your soil, so that you have a better balance. And that's going to be education. And I really do encourage those people to get off of the pesticides, because not only do we need to for our health and well-being, but also with the new regulations. So it is going to be a little bit of an educational step that people are going to take. And I just want you all to know that it absolutely can be done. And you can still grow fire. And I know that David is doing that with his indoor gardens right now, too.
Yeah, like a lot of the pesticides you mentioned are not even approved for foodstuffs, like that avid stuff. So, but like Kelly mentioned, like integrated pest management, you have to integrate at every level of the way. Maintaining your room at 50% humidity, it's one way to do it, but it should be looking at managing your dew point. What is your nighttime humidity? Use compost tea, foliar spray if you can. And that kind of stuff. And you have beneficial microbial that you can apply to the leaf surface, but predatory insect at every level. resistance you can build in your old grow room and your system, cleanliness. That's the way to go. And it's integrated throughout your old processes.
And breeding for resistance as well. That's going to be really important for the future to all of you breeders out there.
So when people talk about pest management too, people talk about, I have a pest, what do I do to get rid of it? As a longtime black market grower, PM is something that everybody seems to get. I haven't had PM since I started spraying compost teas on my plants 10 years ago. So in 10 years of operating in the Pacific Northwest, I haven't had it. Now, whether my compost tea will pass Health Canada's QA is a completely different story, but the integrated pest management concept comes down to the integrated part of it. Every bit of your environment is something you should be controlling and trying to figure out what the cause is. For example, powdery mildew, dew point from daytime heat to nighttime cold is a huge problem for that because the moisture in your air turns into liquid and it lands on your plants and it's like airflow. Those kind of things there's 12 solutions that prevent you from getting powdery mildew. You've got to use all 12. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk integrated pest management. And when you start getting to a higher scale, it becomes even more important that every one of these things are constantly being evaluated. Because, if you have a 1,000 square foot room that gets a couple of bugs and you're organic, they don't move very fast. You can take measures using things like rosemary oil and stuff like that to eliminate the predator bugs. Whereas if you have a giant outdoor field, there's no way to control where these pests are coming from. You can't have a clean room walking into the field or anything like that. And so that's where it becomes largely about your environment and putting positive, beneficial living things in your environment in order to have them take up the space that a bad pathogen would, in order for them to sort of colonize your plant, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
companion planting as well.
This is such a great conversation, so we are going to have to take it offline after one more question. And then, I think you asked, did you already? We've got one right behind you.
Two more questions?
No, two more?
You could always come and talk with us just on the side of the stage after if you missed your question.
Okay. Well, this is actually more of a comment than a question for you guys. So right now, medical patients, we have a list of what we're able to access through LPs, and they are going to be, I guess, that's a standard license to have an LP.
Yep.
So that means we're not going to have access to products like this. We can still choose to go and buy from you guys, and when I hear about a product like this that is sustainable, there's not a bunch of chemicals being used on it, I want my medicine to be that.
Well, if we start getting away from the idea of product, let's start utilizing whole foods because there is no regulation on utilizing raw nettle. There's no regulation on utilizing comfrey. There's no regulation on utilizing burdock root. All of those are nutrients that that aren't product related. Let's move more towards whole foods because, like I said earlier, that's what's healthier for our bodies and that's what's healthier for our plants as well. If we start getting out of the product-based ideology, and I own a nutrient company, and I'm talking you out of buying products. The idea is to create your own products in-house, and that's going to bring your costs down, and you won't be having to talk about what you're bringing in.
When you talk about access for medical patients to recreational product, essentially, this did come up at the Health Canada consultation on micros. The question was, if a licensed producer has their license under a medical system, do they have to distribute to medical patients first, or can they distribute to everyone? The answer from Health Canada is that they don't want to restrict the businesses. What they want to do is give medical patients access to everything that's out there. So you will have access under the medical system, I believe. You will have access to the entire, because they're going to let the medical companies sell recreationally. So essentially what they're trying to do is create as many options for you as they can, as opposed to restricting the actual product flow. So I hope that you'll have access to it, and long term it should be covered by healthcare, so the cost shouldn't be as much of a concern.
And it should be zero rated for tax.
Agreed, yeah.
You have something to add, David? And then we're going to have to wrap up.
It's just a tax. You're just probably going to pay less tax as a medical patient compared to recreational
Zero tax.
user.
All right, that was great. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I think this is really a conversation that really, like I said, holds true to BC. So thanks, and if you have any questions, please feel free to come talk to any of our panelists down at the right-hand side of the stage. Enjoy the rest of the Lift Expo. Thanks.